gonna let you in on a little secret about myself. Sometimes, maybe like once a month, at night when it's totally dark, and this is more likely to happen in winter, I'll go up to the window of my house, much more likely to be an upstairs window, and on my own I'll just look out at the night, and that would usually mean looking out onto a suburban street, looking at the street lights sort of lighting, well, yeah, that's what they do, isn't it? Lighting up the street in this completely static, almost painting like there's a light breeze. I'd maybe watch the leaves moving ever so slightly in the tree. I might look out for birds or clouds slowly moving across the sky. And there's something about that scene that I would always find really entrancing and strange and impossible to grasp entirely. Like if I would try to understand it or put it into words, I would lose the weird magical feeling taking hold of me. And I would also kind of wonder, like, who else is out there, because it looks totally abandoned and empty. Is the whole world, or at least my whole suburb, just totally abandoned for half of the day as soon as the sun goes down? What's alive out there aside from tiny nocturnal animals? And why am I telling you that? Well, the story for this episode is My Country Does Not Dream by Han Song, one of my favourite writers I've found over time reading more and more translated Chinese fiction. And that feeling I've just described to you, I think occurs, for me anyway, as a reader in this story a few times. But that's only one reason that you should read it. It's got all sorts of things for all sorts of readers, and perhaps appropriately, I've got more than one guest on for this episode. I've actually got myself and then 3 members of the London Chinese science fiction group who are, let it be known, all friends of the pod, and they're an awesome group whose meetings you can just join in for free. Just go to their Twitter or get onto their WeChat group. If you're struggling to get onto that, just let me know. They've also got a mailing list, which is how they sort of set up these events outside of the Great Firewall Zone. It's all done in Zoom. It's fantastic. You should join. Anyway, I should get on with the news, the translated Chinese fiction news. So we got 4 items this time. I'll try and rattle through these quickly. The first one is an article. It's from Sixth Tone, a really interesting English language, would you call it magazine? I think they're maybe web only, but a news website based inside China. And they've got an article called Infinite Scroll, The Making of China's Web Fiction Epics. To be honest, I have not read this one. I just don't have enough time these days to properly preview every single news item I drop on you guys. But it's all about web fiction in China and the sort of industry angle on it. So yeah, what's to lose? Read that if it interests you. The next one, I have read this one. This is an article in the Telegraph, or as we call it in the UK, the Torygraph. It is a right-leaning paper, but they have published an article which has one of the former guests and authors covered on the show. It's Shen Yang. Some of her words appear in an article called What Life's Really Like in Lockdown Shanghai. Sorry, I'm competing with millions of people for food. What Life's Really Like in Lockdown Shanghai. I think the title of the article was possibly taken from her own words, but it's like basically a compilation of like little quotes from people living through the lockdown that's going on there right now at the time of recording. The article itself came out on the 26th of April, so just over a week ago from when I'm recording on the 5th of May. So yeah, just disclaimer there about the dates. Okay, next news. This is really self-indulgent meta news, but what the hell? It is appropriate, as you'll find out. So a short story of mine called Meta Shanghai, and that's why I was saying meta is appropriate. A short story of mine, Meta Shanghai, has come out in a book, in recently published collection of science fiction short stories called Aptera 2021. I've read Aptera 2020, the previous sort of installment in this anthology, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I'm just over the moon, actually over the moon, literally, actually, really over the moon, to be in this collection. Feels great, especially to have written a story, gonna caveat it with about Shanghai. The elevator pitch for this story that I have sort of formulated is this. A man pining for his old life in Shanghai rebuilds the city in a computer game, but after installing too many mods, the simulation outpaces him. So if you've ever played SimCity, you might have an idea what I'm hinting at here in this little sales pitch for the story. So if that interests you and you want to read more amazing science fiction from authors working today, then you can go order Aptera 2021. There'll be a link in the show notes to the publisher's website. The publisher is Brainmill Press. Okay, final news item. This is a YouTube video. It was uploaded by Translators Aloud, and it's friend of the pod, former show guest Jack Hargreaves, reading a little something from a book he's translated and is now seeking a publisher for. It's Submarines in the Night, and it's by Chun Chunchung's book, also called Submarines in the Night. So if you want to get 6 minutes of this charming gentleman reading a piece of fiction he's translated, it's up there on YouTube. The link is in the show notes. Now that is all of the TrChFic news I prepared for this episode, so without further ado, let's get to the interview. I'm sure you guys will enjoy it. So we're doing something a little bit different for this episode. We are bringing on 3 guests, and 2 of them have been on the pod in one way or another before, and we've got 1 newcomer that I'm very excited to welcome. So we have, in no particular order, we've got Lu Guanzhao, who is one of the fearless leaders of the London Chinese Science Fiction Book Club. If you're getting deja vu, he came on before to talk to me about Folding Beijing. So welcome back, Guanzhao. We got Scarlett Zhang, who I believe joined in for the 50th episode party. So welcome back, Scarlett. And first time appearing on the show, we've got Wang Jin. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Scarlett and Jin, you are sort of new joint leaders of the London Chinese Sci-Fi Book Club. Did I get that right?
Yeah, not quite a leader yet, I would say.
I think you are the leader. We are co-leaders, all of us. So I think we don't have a leader and other members, and we are equally to, especially in running the London Chinese Science Fiction Group, since Angela is stepping down because she has other work to do. So, but I'm personally very happy to have all these people, new people, and to make this group even more dynamic than before, I believe. Yeah.
Very exciting. So I'm going to try not to lead us through the whole conversation. I'm going to try and take the same model and have us all be equal. But first, I'll just ask you guys if you want to introduce yourselves. Guanzhao, do you want to introduce yourself first? For anyone who's new.
Just in case, I have been on this show like how many years ago? 2 years ago.
2 years, crazy.
2 years ago, crazy. I remember that was episode 17, and I don't know which episode is this gonna be.
72, I think.
72, more than 70, you got. That's a huge achievement. But personally, I am very happy to be with Angus again on this show and to talk about Chinese. You can say it's science fiction, but you can say Hanson's work is not that quite science fiction in a way. But personally, I am Guangzhou and currently a PhD candidate at University College London, comparative literature. And my PhD thesis is actually about a comparative study between contemporary Chinese and British science fiction. For the Chinese side, there are the Chinese New Wave, everyone knows about it. But for the British part, it's called the British science fiction boom, starting from the 90s as well. People like Ian Banks, Ken MacLeod, China Mieville, and people like them. So they have a boom for themselves, and also the counterpart in China, the Chinese New Wave. So I'm trying to set up a comparison between these 2 literary movement or phenomena, and to connect them to the political and cultural and social background behind them. Yeah, that's, I think, very simply about me.
Wonderful. Scarlett and Jin, do either of you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi everyone, I'm Scarlett Zhang Xuan, and I'm a loyal fan of the show. And so at the moment, I'm doing some translations, classical music and social media, and I'm very glad to come back for the show.
Awesome. And that only leaves one person. Jin, do you want to tell us about yourself?
Hi, I'm Jane. I'm a girl, 26, living in Beijing now, where the story takes place I'm a PhD candidate at Beijing Normal University. Okay, that's all.
Jin, I wonder if I could ask one more question. Does your study relate to Chinese science fiction, or is Chinese science fiction just a sort of a personal interest for you?
Yes, of course. My major is nanology, and my research is related to Chinese science fiction, especially the contemporary science fiction.
Okay, cool. Right. I guess we could dispense with introductions. Since there's 4 of us, we could talk about ourselves for hours, but instead I want to talk about our story for this episode, which I've not named yet in this interview anyway. It's Han Song's My Country Does Not Dream. I thought I'd drop a little factoid for listeners first. Guanzhao, you mentioned China Mieville, one of the sort of new 90s, I think, new wave or late 90s, turn of the millennium British writer or English writer, who was part of a bit of a new wave in UK sci-fi. I thought, wait a minute, how old is that guy? I've just checked. He's 49. And for comparison, Han Song is a little bit older than him. He's 56 or 57, depending on how we're counting. So they're kind of contemporaneous, but not quite. I thought I'd mention that. That's an interesting thing, because strange things can happen with time in translated fiction. A story might reach us in English and seem new, but it's from long ago in the original language. I could go on and on about that, but let's keep things moving. What is the premise of this story, like the elevator pitch?
Because you just mentioned Mieville again, but he is actually not one of the new wave writers in the Anglo-American context. He's for that special period. I think Mieville is part of the boomers of the science fiction. It's called British sci-fi boom. So, so just for clarification, because I know Chinese new wave, the term for it can be confusing from time to time, because the new wave has got a very particular historical connotation, especially in the British and American science fiction. And in the Chinese context, it's called the Chinese New Wave after the 1990 or 1989 stuff and that. So actually, in my PhD, I changed that term. I changed that term to the Chinese sci-fi boom to make that comparison with British counterpart.
Right.
But still, it's kind of an interchangeable term, so it means the same thing. Just to in my study, just to make a comparison, just to set up counterpart stuff between the two booms. Actually, this story, it's really hard to define it. We can say, because Han Song's work is always hard to define. Is science fiction, or like you mentioned, Mieville, or the kind of new weird writing, right? Because everything seems very eerie and weird and strange, and that is sort of definitional to Han Song's other works as well, apart from this one. And this one, actually, I believe it talks about sleepwalking. And that is, if we just use one word to summarize everything, sleepwalking. And people find themselves sleepwalking over the nighttime and to continue their daytime work, actually, but they are not conscious about all of this kind of a contribution to the society. And people keep working without rest and keep making, economic contributions and to make the country's development and to the GDP stuff and that. And there's, I think, one character got enlightened by a outcomer, or someone coming from the US. He said, it's an outcomer. It's a typical, I think, typical literary theme in Chinese literature in the past, and people coming from the outside of the environment to say something or to intercept what is going on within a certain context. But anyway, the character called Xiao Ji, he got enlightened. He knows everything, and he just he was just trying to escape some kind of secret place going after him. And I think the ending is quite ambiguous, just like in Han Song's other work as well. And it seems that Xiao Ji is running away with his wife, to some place, but it can also be interpreted that he got nowhere to go. He got nowhere to go but to end his life and to be in a kind of a everlasting sleeping without walking, some kind of a state that yeah, I'm not sure if I have made this clever explanation of the story clear enough for the show or for the conversation. Yeah,
I think that's pretty good. Does anyone want to fill in anything they feel Guanzhao missed?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything.
Yeah, I not nothing else springs to mind with me. I guess another sort of line of the plot is Xiaoji's wife. They first notice, or one of the signs something is amiss, is that he and his wife have both got new clothes, men and women's clothes in their cupboards, and they that becomes a source of strife. She accuses him of, I guess, doing something, probably cheating behind her back. But once he's sort of become aware of what's going on, he ends up tailing his wife to see where she's going. And as she's sleepwalking, she's having a sort of not quite coerced, but clearly non-consensual liaison with this guy who is really high up in the Chinese government, basically in the Communist Party. And he's this official is not one of the sleepwalkers. And I guess well, I've already spoiled it, but spoilers, he sort of he reveals the whole nature of the plan and what's going on. And a thing that's quite interesting is he says, well, he says contradictory things. On one hand, he says we're doing what's necessary to help China catch up with the US and its allies. This is the only way to do it. Playing it fair or using conventional means wouldn't work. But he also says this is not about China. This is about bigger stuff. This is about elevating the human race to the next stage of economic development and opening up new doors. Well, he doesn't specify what those are. And that's interesting. I think that might be interesting for our conversation to flag that. And I know we're kind of just going to summarize the story and what happens, but a big theme or a thing that goes on in Xiaoji's mind is like that he wrestles with is, I guess, his patriotism, because on one hand he's found out something awful about his country, but he gets mixed feelings because it's an American that reveals it to him, and this American guy seems to enjoy revealing it to him. And I don't know, that vibed with some of the experiences I had living as a foreigner in China, for sure. I think I witnessed conversations like that. So I thought I'd mention that as well. Other thing I wanted to mention is it's quite funny that you had to correct me there, Guanzhao, about mixing up the English sci-fi or the English language sci-fi new wave and the English language sci-fi boom, because the last time you were on the show talking about Beijing, folding Beijing, I made the exact same mistake and you gave me the exact same correction. So clearly I've learned nothing. To keep things moving along, I wondered if we could talk about how we first read this story. Who here read this like ages ago? Did any of you guys read this ages ago?
I think we did the session in that book club exactly a year ago. So I read it a year ago, and like for this interview, I reread it like a few days ago. So, but like I vaguely remembered what happened in that story, but like I felt differently when I read it again.
Exactly the same here. First time I read this was for the Sci-Fi Book Club. I actually went and bought the book that the translation appears in, which is an interesting book I might talk about in a bit. Jin, how was that your first encounter with the story as well?
I read it for this talk yesterday, and when I had read the first 2 chapters of this story, I thought it would never be published in China. So far, so true.
Yeah, there's no chance that this could get published in China. It's really political. I'm actually impressed that Han Song's happy to get this published abroad. It's impressive, really. Guanzhao, had you read this one before the book club covered it?
Actually, I heard about this story many years ago, but I didn't really read it back then. So my first time encountering the story is also for the reading group last year in April. And actually Han Song is quite, I believe he himself is quite happy about this story, because and he is also he also wishes to touch on some relatively more sensitive topics, because when I was doing the summary, summary of the reading group last year, I sent him the draft and for some revision, and he's really keen to, because he mentioned some topics that I personally wouldn't think the WeChat gonna publish it. So I make it vague, because he said in a quite straightforward way, but I made it vague, and he asked me why I did that. So I just have to clarify that it's not my, if I just put it that way, so WeChat gonna have the scrutiny more. It just took more time. Actually, it did take more time to publish this summary. Because for the regular session, it will be just sent out right away after I just finish copy editing and everything. But for that, it took for that session it took 3 hours. 3 hours.
Right.
Something definitely happened in the background, so people maybe operating the system, they have to check everything. But luckily it got published. I have already told Han Song that we may have a problem publishing something, but still it just went out anyway after a long wait. But I got the sense that Han Song himself is quite he got some message, and I think that message quite deliberate. Just something he wished to discuss and trying to send out kind of voice with this publication. Anyway, the publishing this story is circulated online quite spreadly or widely, I think. So people, if you are you can still read it. Because if you know something about the Chinese online, if you can't read it, so you can't read it anyway. But you can still find the story pretty easy. Just the Baidu, I think. You can get the story, so it's not that hard to find, even though it's not officially published anywhere.
Right, so you can get it in like web page form, but you can't get it in print, basically.
Anyway, but you can find the story, and if you can like the print, for printing, I believe there are more regulations about the publishing or the publish agency. They got some special concerns, more things going on. But if you can publish it online, I think you can just evade many of these problems.
I had some similar experiences way back when I wanted to try and get this show beyond, inside the PRC, basically. Wang Zhao, you offered to help me, because I was a little bit stuck getting signed up for Himalaya, the mainland podcast service. And in the end, I didn't need your help. But anyway, I got myself signed up there and started uploading the show there, as well as all the international podcast providers. And I did notice for some episodes, usually the more sensitive ones, they would have a very strangely long processing time after I did the upload. And most of them didn't, but a few of them, it would take so long to process that either, something in the site had gone wrong, or a human being, it was, waiting for a human being, presumably at an office desk to get to it. So it's kind of interesting that I think in a lot of, at least for people outside China who know a little bit about the Great Firewall, they maybe imagine that it's a completely automatic system where if you use the wrong keyword, your thing just gets taken down. But actually, for something like this, there must be some people employed who will be manually checking stuff to see whether it's a little bit sensitive but still okay to go online. So it's not a completely binary, you're deleted or you're not deleted. There's a little bit of a gray area, and I guess this story seems to be in that gray area. It's interesting. I wonder if for each of you, before you read the story, you'd had a lot of experience reading other Han Song stories, because I had. Are any of you guys huge or big Han Song fans?
I'm not a Han Song fan. I don't know Mr. Han Song in real life. All I know about him is his byline. Based on my limited reading experience, his novels are kind of difficult to read, and maybe he is not my dish.
Right. Scarlett, what about you?
I think there was only one we talked about in the Sci-Fi Club session, like a long time ago. That was one of the other I have read. Yeah, it's because like his writing, it's a bit like cold and ruthless and that kind of thing. Like for myself, I would probably read more like very emotional things. Or yeah, it's like pretty personal, I think.
Right. Yeah, he's among the Chinese sci-fi writers who I've read in English translation. He's definitely Mr. Dark. I think the only other stuff that I've read that is as dark is some of Liu Cixin's stories, but they don't feel like, they've never felt to me like very gothic or psychologically twisted. And they're more just dark because it's like they're pessimistic about the way the universe works, or some terrible event happens where thousands and millions of people die. Whereas in Han Song, it's like it's more twisted and sinister, and at least in some of his stories that I've read, not in all of them. I also had kind of associated him with like transport, because I know he's got a trilogy. What is it? Ditya Gautier, something else. He's got a trilogy all about railways, and a few of the stories available in English are also about transport. There's one translated by Ken Liu about submarines. There's one translated by Nathaniel Isaacson about passenger planes. But this one's, if it's about anything like that, it's about like the urban economy, working in a city. But yeah, I'll stop going on and on and on about my own opinions and ask you guys, like, what was your first impression reading the story? And then if you read it a second time, how did you feel coming back to it? Guanzhao, what about you? You must have some deep thoughts.
Well, I can't say I have any deep thought in that sense, and because reading Han Song is like a decoding process, and yeah, his story is always coded with lots of symbols and lots of political references and historical references that so in that sense, when you reread it, when someone read the story, I mean, you will always got something new about the story. For example, when I was reading the story for the first time last year, I noticed, because the most straightforward theme for the story is the sleepwalking. And back then I didn't really think very deep about it. But for this time, I read it today. Actually, I suddenly got this sleepwalking. We can interpret the sleepwalking from the perspective of the loss of sleep, because it reminds me of a book. Do you know the Jonathan Cray's 24/7? Do you know that book?
I don't, but I'm gonna look that up right now.
So I got it by my hand. It's called 24/7 Late Capitalism and the End of Sleep. So
right.
So this writer just talk about the sleep and the end of sleep from the political economic perspective, and how we incorporate the process of sleep into our political economy. So I think this story, if we read from that perspective, it also means that we are using the time of sleep because in the past, sleep is the non-productive process. So people just they were doing nothing when we sleep. So for Jonathan Cray, so the sleep means the last place, last utopia for human beings to be away from the capitalist market and capitalist exploitation.
Or for the capitalist, it's like the last unexploited box of treasures. It's a bit like how they're waiting for the North Pole to melt so they can build up new shipping lanes to speed up delivery times.
Yeah, exactly. And when we have that sleep incorporated in the process, so it means that we have lost the last utopia for human beings. And just like Xiaojing's story, they got literally nowhere to go in the end. So because the government is trying to put this system, to put the sleepwalking system everywhere in the world, including the surrounding nations. It's not only China anymore. So it means a process, I believe, a process of globalization, especially the killings, it's not the killing, it's not the subsumption, I believe. It's kind of a subsumption to subsume everyone into the same logic of money, of the market as well. I think that's the thing I have realized for this time when I was reading the story. But I believe there are also other ways to interpret everything, just one way of many, because Han Song is always ambiguous, intentionally, I believe, to make everything not clear enough and to leave some room for reading it.
Yeah, I thought I'd read a little quoted review on the publisher's page for the book you just named there, Late Capitalism and the Ends of Sleep, because this is a really nice analysis. I'll just read it. It's from Stephen Poole, writing for the New Statesman. He said, "Sleep is a standing affront to capitalism. That is the argument of Jonathan Cray's provocative and fascinating essay, which takes 24/7 as a spectral umbrella term for round-the-clock consumption and production in today's world. The human power nap is a macho response to what Crary notes is the alarming shrinkage of sleep in modernity. The average North American adult now sleeps approximately 6.5 hours at night," he observes, which is an erosion from 8 hours a generation ago and 10 hours in the early 20th century. A humane and bracingly splenetic counterblast with lots of interesting microtheses along the way. And I thought, oh shit, 6.5 hours is basically how long I sleep. But the thing there is, I don't shave off that sleep to do more work. I shave off that sleep usually to consume something, a book or media. And the point about consuming is something I didn't really pick up on the first time I read the story for the sci-fi group. I noticed this second time around that although everyone is working twice as hard by doubling their hours by working at night, no one gets richer because everyone spends their extra, like what would be their savings, on consumer products when they're sleepwalking. So the Xiaoji and his wife are spending it on clothes, and we're told that other people, like people in the countryside, they're working double time as well. But then while they're sleepwalking, they're going into the city to buy useless crap that doesn't advance their lives, because this is another way you supercharge a consumer economy. People don't accumulate savings, people accumulate crap. Or these days, we don't even accumulate crap. We sign up to new subscription services in exchange for like access to streaming, which is probably, I think, didn't Netflix describe sleep as their enemy? I'm sure I heard about that. That's their biggest opponent isn't, say, Amazon Prime. Netflix's biggest rival is sleep. Crazy. Sorry if I went on and on and on there. I'm sorry, I forgot. Scarlett and Wang Jin, did you just read this story the one time, or have you read it twice?
I have read it twice.
Okay, and was second time round different from first time round?
And the first time when I read it, I was like, oh, interesting. And I was like, you know what? It actually makes sense. And somehow it might even be true. That was what I was thinking the first time I read it. And the second time, I think I'm more realistic. Yeah.
What do you mean by more realistic? That you dismissed it as something that's not too real, not too scary?
The second time, I just feel like the story is quite refreshing to me, like because, like, as you said, his style is quite gothic and dark, and then I realized as the way he writes, oh, it's a sci-fi story.
The genre is an interesting thing though, because I guess I assume all you guys read this one in the original Chinese. I read it in the book in English, in the book it was published in, which is part of a series, apparently number 5 in a series called Exploring Dark Short Fiction. So in that series, Han Song has been placed alongside, as far as I'm aware, mostly horror writers, not sci-fi writers. And it makes perfect sense that you could read this one as sci-fi, you could read it as horror, you could read it as like weird fiction. And to me, yeah, it feels like it's a weird fiction as much as it's sci-fi, because there is something in at least in this translation, there's something in the atmosphere about the story that's very bizarre and uncanny, which I kind of feel when I look out the window of my house at night and I see a suburban street lit up by streetlights. I find something very powerful about that empty world where the lights are still on, even though the sun is down. It really, if I think about it too long, and if I look out that window for long enough, it puts a weird shiver down my spine. I don't know. Do you guys feel anything about that? About just the nighttime in general, or for you, is it just a time to sleep?
I do. I think like when I was in Finland, I was there during like winter time, and when it was dark and there wasn't anyone there at all, and it was like all really, really snowy and white and with just lights, and it doesn't feel real to me.
Yeah, and it's hard to capture that feeling in words, because it's a feeling that's, on one hand, it's entirely in your mind, but on the other hand, it is totally a feeling all about the environment around you. But it's something you can see, but also can't see. And I think that's what makes it weird and so great for weird fiction. There's a bit in the story where the character actually gets a shiver down his spine that I think I maybe sort of enjoyed reading first time around, but on second time around, I was looking for these moments where there's something strangely beautiful as well as awful about this world that the Chinese authorities, the government basically, has created, not because they wanted to create something beautiful, but just because they basically wanted to find a way to cheat, to like double the power of the economy in an underhand way. But here's the bit that like I really enjoyed second time around. Here we go. By then it was already 1:00 a.m. Xiaoji looked out of the tower and saw the entire city look like a cluster of shimmering stars had suddenly come to rest on the surface of the earth, everywhere bright as broad daylight. A tide of cars wove about like soaring dragons. A stream of people surged like stars in the Milky Way, even more splendid and shimmering than during the daytime. Xiaoji thought the light really is brightest in the darkest night. Beijing's 16 million denizens sleepwalked about the beguiling city. And in the skies, airliners with their lights flashing rumbled overhead in numbers even greater than during the day. Imagining those somnambulant pilots flying the planes sent a wave of shivers through him. Cool. Speaking of looking at things out my window, I live these days under the flight path of Manchester Airport's south runway. So planes do fly over me. And it is a bit strange in the daytime, especially when it's the really big ones that have been going to the Arab Gulf. But at night, it's really something, especially when there's clouds in the sky, because the planes have their fog lights on. So you see these weird beams of light moving through the night sky, and it's like nothing on this world. It's so creepy, but so beautiful. And there's another Han Song story where I got that feeling. It's called I think it's Tombstone of the Universe. It's in the collection translated by Xueting Ni, where there wasn't really any murder or horror or anything, but he just visits these huge, vast graveyards in space that are monuments to previous generations of humanity. And it's like so somber and strange and lifeless. Ooh, I don't know, that's something I really enjoy about Han Song's writing that I wasn't so aware of reading stories years ago. But I just wanted to ask all of you, is this something you see in his stories? Do you see them as horror, sci-fi, weird? Do you see them as similar to other writers you've read or totally unique? Like, what are your thoughts? Guanzhao, what do you think? Does he remind you of other writers you've read?
Yeah, I like to follow up with the other story just mentioned about the tomb, actually, tombs in the universe. That is one of the first story I read about. I read from Han Song, actually, and that is one of my favorites. especially because that story was divided basically into two parts, right? They appeared the time in the past and time in the future, and people just found lots of tombstones in the universe, and nobody knows where they come from, and they later in the story they just disappeared. Are they right? They just disappeared, and no one tells the reason why. So I was actually waiting for the translation for a long time because I really like to write something about it. But if you don't have a English translation, it makes the referencing system much more difficult and much more difficult. So I was waiting for the translation, and that reminds me because that is one of Han Song's earlier stories as well, and that one was written I think in 1991. So basically one of his very first stories, and that story and his latest story got a very different sense. At least I believe it. So that story was beginning of the beginning of the Chinese 1990s, and at that time people were still confusing about how China is going on. So I can feel a sense of confusion in that story. But in this story, it's published. It's not published, but written like about 10 years later than the Terms of the Universe, and we can see there's more about confusion and there's more about you can feel the horrors, right? You can feel the gothic element inside. So people are not only confusing for something, but they are afraid of something as well. And the society is also changing because you can see a sense of developmentalism, right? How to pronounce it?
Developmentalism, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So and people are still are fighting for the GDP growth, and they are fighting for the economy. And I think that is what what China is still trying to convince people with this grand narrative, because we are doing everything for the growth of the country, right? For the growth, hard and soft power alike, and everything, because even though we have the market and we have the public voice rising from the market, but we are still confined. And we are still influenced by a very strong voice from the grand narrative from the state. And that makes a kind of a doubling, I believe. It's a doubling between a bottom-up discourse based on the public voice, and also a top-down grand narrative still controlling a certain part of society. So it's quite interesting when the two sides of society converge into one thing in this story and make it a conversation between the grand narrative and also the market powers as well. So in terms of relation with other writers, I believe Han Song's really hard to find a counterpart, either in China or outside. People like to categorize Han Song in science fiction, but I believe he in a more particular way, he is more aligned with the new wǒde writings. If we can just date it back to China Medieval and M. John Harrison, people like them, to writing some contemporary wǒde story, and which just break the boundaries between different genres, right? The science fiction, horrors, and detective, and ghost story, and spooky stories, right? So Han Song is unique, and we can only read his story in relation to the historical and social backgrounds, to really understand what the messages he wishes to convey within the stories, I believe.
Yeah, it's funny. So like I said, I listened to our last chat, episode 17, Guanzhao, and we talked about something a little bit similar there. You, in talking about Beijing, folding Beijing 2 years ago, you mentioned the Jiu Liu, the 996 working, what would you call that, model?
Yeah.
And you said that although it was not exactly popular, it was a hot topic to be criticized. There were plenty people, including 20-something starting their careers, that bought into it and thought, yeah, this is, I think you phrased it pretty well. You said these people felt that I'm young, I have like surplus energy, I have surplus time. I should be spending that to better myself further down the road and better my country. But of course, the way that capitalism works, that surplus time and energy, and in this story, sleep, doesn't come back to you. It goes to your boss, and maybe some of it goes to the government via taxes. But if it comes back to you at all, it will only be very indirectly. So I know that since then, there's actually been some pushback against 996 in China from, as far as I'm aware, the government. There were some reforms to give, as far as I'm aware, because I'm not living there anymore, give working people a little bit more protection from, I guess, capital, from companies. Do you think there's been a change of mood in China about that, or am I just getting all my news from the wrong places?
I think you're right about it, because 2 years ago, and people start to talk about the 996 working situation then, but after the COVID changed a lot. After the COVID, then people, especially among the young people, and they start to realize something's going on in the society, and the extra energy doesn't come back to truth. And right now we're talking about a new movement called lying down movement. So just we call it 躺平. Yeah, we call it lying down. Yeah, we're not working 996. We're just lying down, and whatever happened, it doesn't really matter to me. So I think but I think it's not what people really want to do. It's more like a mocking. People talk about in the mockery, tongue. But we still have to work, and no work, no money. So that's the current situation. But people are still, I think it's more like an informal and public resistance to this kind of 996 working mode. And the states and the government, they start to issue more protection. But the legalization, the process of that is really long. So it doesn't really we don't really have any solid policies to be issued in recent 2 years. The government started talking things, and they say, we have that kind of topic on the schedule for the next round of legalization, but it took years, and it took a long time, and during this long time, many things could be changed. Especially no one can imagine how COVID gonna influence us before it come to us. But the COVID, especially in the COVID, when the economy is not that strong compared to the time before that, and people notice that our energy and our time invested in working hard, it doesn't really change very much about the personal life. And because I noticed that people working for the self, for personal aspiration, is really Thatcherite in a way, right? So people are responsible for their own life, and people take care of their own families and relatives with hard work. And if you work hard, you can get more result or more fruit, more bread, and that is for personal aspiration. And you realize it because you work harder than your peers. This feels me really Thatcherite, especially in early 1980s. But in China right now, and we still to notice that it's not the thing. We didn't really get many things after we're working hard. So that kind of dream, if you like to see, dream aspiration doesn't really it's not really realized in many ways. So I think people still start to rethink about all this kind of schemes, I think.
Yeah. I'm sure for listeners who are in the US and the UK and maybe other Western countries, what I'm about to say will not be a particularly deep insight, but here in the UK, we didn't have an economic takeoff like China over the last few decades. So we've not had this problem of an economy growing very quickly, like very, very quickly, and then that growth beginning to level off. The problem we have that affects my generation is housing prices. So for previous generations, it was very easy to get up the ladder. You get a job, then you'll be able to get a good mortgage on a decent house, and that house will appreciate in value over time. So your assets become more and more valuable. You know, you follow the straight and narrow, and the economy delivers you some security. And house prices have never stopped increasing. So that's nice if you want a house, but if you don't, you are getting a much, much, much worse deal. So although maybe salaries, I think salaries over the last few decades here in the UK have not, they've either stayed the same or gone up slightly, but relative to housing prices, they've shrunk massively because housing prices have gone up and up and up and up and up, especially in some areas. So yeah, there's maybe a similar feeling that, hang on, it doesn't seem like we're working any less hard than past generations, but you get the ridiculously bad deal compared with your parents, and it's impossible to ignore for most people these days, I think, especially if they're talking to other people about it. And to bring it back to Han Song's story, this is the Xiaoji's problem, is that he has a very limited number of people he can talk to about what's going on. He's got his American informant, and then later the government official, and that's it. He can't even talk to his wife. So there's a little bit of the, what would you call it, the classic character from genre fiction of like the one sane man in an insane world. But it's good that we have these conversations in real life, because we won't be the lonely insane person who doesn't understand what's going on. It's good to talk about this stuff. Do any of you feel that there's a very obvious political message or metaphor or social message or metaphor in the story? Or do you find it's hard to tell what Han Song actually thinks? Ladies, you've not spoken for a while.
I would like to say something.
You should then.
Yeah, I think so. When I read this story, it was easy to feel that the writer would be like a Chinese man in his 50s, and I found out he's just like a year older than my dad. It's like pretty typical, like that kind of mentality for people in that generation, I think. And like, because also they directly think American people are doing the evil deeds.
Yeah, well, they are, it's true.
Right. And also because according to his age, Cultural Revolution was about to start, and during that time they would use the terms like 打倒美帝苏修, like means down with the American imperialism and Soviet revisionism.
Oh yeah.
So I think he's very influenced by that. And also in the story, he mentioned that the government wants to deal with those people, the people wearing red armbands. They were dealing with heavy metal singers, pioneer fiction writers, political pop artists, the X-generation film directors, underground religious activists.
And podcasters. Kill all the podcasters.
Yeah, so all those sort of people. So he like listed these people. I'm like,
right. So there's some legacy of like pre-market China. There's some of the legacy of, I guess, cultural, like you said, Cultural Revolution China is there, and we wouldn't get that from a younger writer. Like we wouldn't get that from Xia or Chen Qiufan or something.
Yeah, I think in an interview with Chen Qiufan, he mentioned that he realized his readers are worldwide, so he tend to write it with a more like international view.
Yeah, there are. It's an interesting story because you could imagine pretty much any country, be they capitalist, communist, trying this trick. But there are some specifically Chinese things, like some of the things you just listed there. And the character, like we were saying, he wrestles a lot with like his distrust of the American guy and his sense of national pride. which I don't know, I just thought it was interesting. Jin, did that stuff stand out to you at all?
Yeah, in Han Song's novel, he does not hide his political orientation, and in my opinion, his expressions are too straightforward and explicit. And when I read the novel the first time I read it, I think it's not interesting. Just I don't like it. And the second time I reread it, I think it's okay. There has something in it. And I found out that the setting of the story may be based on China's unique situation in the world political environment after World War. Just like everyone wants to be better, become a better version maybe of themselves. This is a very common state of mind and the same to a country. Every country wants to become stronger to provide a better life for their people, especially for the country like China, who got deep hurt in the national competition during modern time. Then the problem turns into how to achieve this goal at an already behind position, and how to balance the effort to achieve this public aim with individuals' own life. Then the novel provides a possibility, a scary government route. In this case, we can easily, even inevitably, to do a deduction according to this expressed in this article, which lead to the author's political thoughts and the emotional time. And then I want to emphasize, that is, it's a novel not published in China. And I first read it, I was sure that will not be published. And I try to find a reason. I think it's not that easy, because we can read it on the website. I think the first and most important thing of the story is it's a boring story. As a sci-fi novel, its power of science, explanatory, and imagination are weak. I don't have fun with it, and then I think that the content of the story involves political smears, and as we all know, China's publishing industry is wary of causing trouble. I think it's not necessary to avoid dangerous. Maybe for this novel, this, in my opinion, is a normal. It's a boring, even boring story.
Okay.
So I wonder why there is an English translation of the novel. Why the translator chose it, and what's the unique value of it? Obviously, in my opinion, it's not good enough. And I want to listen to you guys' views and find out answers through this talk. So I don't speak much before that. And just for now, I don't have found a clue to my question.
Okay.
Back to the political view. I think that both the world and people are completed, and the reality of the world and the person's point of view are also changing all the time. And as the Roland Barthes proposed in nearly a century ago, the author is that whether the political views and emotion of the text that can be seen directly equal to the author's point of view is still questionable. That's all.
Yeah, and you can write a story from a point of view that's not your own. You could experiment with other opinions, and I wonder if Han Song's the kind of guy that does that. One thing I want to respond to, then I'm going to ask a very important question to everyone else. When you said about sort of post-World War II and post-communist revolution mission in China to catch up with other countries after having, so badly fallen behind, I think I had been introduced to that idea while living in China, but I really got a clear picture of that when I visited the Shanghai propaganda poster museum, which is an amazing little independent museum, which is still running, I believe. And in there were some posters from, I think, the 50s, possibly also the 60s, but I think mostly the 50s during the Great Leap Forward, where the government was getting these artists to produce posters saying, come on, guys, let's overtake the steel production in the UK, or overtake the blah blah in blah blah country, usually a Western capitalist country. So the mission was not just to grow the Chinese economy, but to grow a particular industry to the point where it's larger than that of another country's industry. And this was such a new thing for me. Political or economic conversations in the UK never adopt that angle of like, let's overtake this other country. So that's a perspective it would not have come to me had I not lived in China and visited this museum and learned the history. So yeah, the thing in this story of like racing to overtake other countries economically is yeah, it has a real historical basis, like you said. And it, as an outsider to me, it seems it's a funny one, because China's population is literally the biggest in the world by quite a large margin. So to my mind, all the Chinese economy has to do is develop at a regular pace. And it should just, you would think it would naturally be the winner in terms of size, because it's got the most people working in it. So the fact that it can't happen soon enough for the people in the government is interesting, because to me that seems like a psychological desire, that's people's emotions. Because if people had patience or could wait for future generations to take up the baton, then their mission, provided nothing goes drastically wrong, should automatically, be an automatic win just by numbers alone. But that's all I wanted to say there. I think there's a burning question that Jin's asked, and that's, is this story good or bad? So Scarlett and Guanzhao, did you find it boring? Do you see what Jin's saying?
I don't really find it boring. It's quite readable, I think. I would just like keep going on, and yeah, I don't find it boring, I think.
Guanzhao, what about you?
Well, I think we have to define boring, and yeah, we don't have to do this for today. But Han Song is definitely not readable, so he is definitely not a readable author. And also, if we say that a story, especially for science fiction stories, they should be firstly for fun, right? So we read the stories for fun, and definitely we can't read Han Song for fun. So this is a set choose. So in that sense, that is one of the ways why Han Song is not that not that successful in the market compared to Liu Cixin, right, and other writers like Chen Qiufan, because their story, we can read their story for fun. But for Han Song, it's a terrible process and terrible experience reading their story. This one is one of the better ones, actually. So this story, it does have a plot, and it does have a story, has a storyline in it. But for many other stories, you can't really see what's happened, and especially there are some stories I really personally haven't quite finished. Red Ocean is one of the example. It's not translated, but that is a novel. It's a very long novel published 2004. And it was divided into several parts, and the several parts is sort of connected, but you can't really get the clue when you read it. And it's a terrible experience of reading it as well. And there are lots of really difficult expressions in Chinese, and I can't personally, I'm a Chinese native, and I can't really follow the story. And from the readability, it's not readable at all. And especially if you read the other stories like the subway, right? We talk about the subway, and we talk about and even I heard the news that the Hospital trilogy is the most recent work from Han Song. The Hospital trilogy will be published in 2023, and will be translated by Michael Barry. So huge name in translation, and I didn't really finish that trilogy and any of the installments. I just stopped in the half. I can feel the sense of so I don't know if we can say it's boring because I can't really finish it. So from that perspective, it's boring. But if you wish to read something as a work of literature, this so-called serious and unpopular literature, and I think that is a way we can interpret. It's not read. We can interpret some messages from the novels, to see him not as a popular writer, but as just as a writer. He is a writer, but probably it's not for the popular genre, as in science fiction, because for science fiction we got some specific expectation, right? People have some predetermined understanding of what science fiction should be. Han Song is definitely not within that expectation, and so science fiction readers might find his work boring and find his work unreadable. Yeah, so I think that's why that's part of the reason we should put Han Song away from science fiction writers and to see him as just as a writer, because many writers are not readable from a certain perspective, and I would say Han Song is one of them.
Yeah, I wonder if I'm shielded a little bit from his writing style because I'm reading it in the English translation. And so if I try and think of all the Han Song stories I've read, there was Submarines from Ken Liu, there's The Airplane and the Passengers and Regenerated Bricks from the Reincarnated Giant anthology. There's this one from Exploring Dark Short Fiction. There's maybe some others I'm forgetting, but I've just read a handful of his short stories translated to English, and none of them were written in especially difficult English. Some of the stories were a bit mysterious and beguiling. Regenerated Bricks was definitely not spelling out any answers. It was quite mysterious and open to interpretation. The rest of them were odd, but I didn't feel that they were hard for me to understand. Like this story, I think Jin, you said it. It's very straightforward and it just tells you what's going on. Not many things are left in question, but like aside from a few interesting vocabulary words that the translator Nathaniel Isaacson chose, like a somnambulant instead of sleepy or sleepwalking, I didn't find the English hard at all. So I don't know. Have any of you had a look at the English translations or not at all?
Well, personally, I would say all these stories translated from Chinese written by Han Song is the easier ones actually. So especially I just look through the story that has an English translation, and actually they themselves are written in a quite straightforward way. So they are one of Han Song's easier stories to read and to follow. And those hard ones, it's even really hard to be translated. And the Hospital trilogy is one of them. So I really look forward to what the translation gonna be. It's really hard to follow and really confusing, really ambiguous. So that's the reason why only people like Michael Barry have the capability of translating that sort of story. Yeah.
Interesting. It does strike me that quite a few weird fiction writers do go for sort of strange writing styles. So like the big one that springs to mind is H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote in a very sort of over elaborate, great big long sentences, crazy vocabulary style. Other writers I can think of, Jeff Vandermeer, he has a sentence in his Annihilation trilogy that is written on a wall that spirals down like an underground lighthouse, and the sentence literally never ends. It just keeps on going and going and going and going with no full stop and no pause. Off the top of my head, another writer I like in that genre, Thomas Ligotti, often uses very peculiar words, peculiar images, and sort of Lovecraft style, intricate, overcomplicated sentences, ones that your teacher would mark for grammar errors, but for literature make for something interesting, that sort of thing. So it makes sense to me that in the original Chinese, Han Song would be sort of bizarre and elaborate and difficult. But then Chinese and English are so different that, yeah, it makes sense that translators would choose not to try and replicate that, because, yeah, how the hell would you do that without completely rewriting the thing? I wonder as well, I don't know if you guys have thoughts on this, does the difficulty, I think, Jin, you basically said this, that the difficulty of the writing prevents him from becoming hugely popular, which might protect him from censorship. But do you think as well, if the writing is difficult, censors might just get bored or put off reading it, so they don't put in the mental energy to interpret subversive messages? I know that in general, movies in China are subject to more censorship than books, and that would make sense. Movies are easier to digest. Movies are very direct because they put the image right onto the screen, whereas books take more time, they have smaller audiences, and they're capable of being more subtle. Do you think that's a reason why Han Song is able to have a bit of a career, is able to have a career as a writer in China?
Yeah, I believe the Han Song is not, he is also a very high-ranking officer in the Chinese news agency, and I believe he got, because in Chinese we got a specific term for that called 编制, right? It's because of a authority established number of the post, the professional posts in the government and also the government running agencies, and he is one of the listed, and so in the system. So I believe that is it's not only that he wrote really long, really tedious, and really confusing stories, and that no one's read it, so he can get published. And I believe that he got some specific authority and trying to back him up. It might not that be really kind of a straightforward support from someone, but people like reading his story, and these people, they can have some voice in the background. So I believe that's why Han Song keep writing his own stories from that perspective. Yeah, but I'm not sure whether this is right or wrong. Just because, yeah, Han Song's professional identity is also one of the topics that people are trying to discuss. That he is, for one thing, a very important member in the Chinese news agency, and on the other hand, he's also a very, it's not successful, but really famous science fiction writers who is known for this kind of political messages hidden behind the text. So this kind of adapting for his own identity. Some people are trying to discuss this topics as well, I believe. Yeah.
I have a totally random question for you all. So I realize I'm the only Lawai here, which means I got something in common with one of the characters, the American guy who seems to be like a CIA spy. Just wanted to ask, what do you guys think of the Meguoren in this story? Do you think he's a good guy or a bad guy?
I don't think he's a good person, but I think the writer wants us to think he's a bad guy, but the guy himself doesn't necessarily be. But it's weird. Still, I think it's because of his age or generation. One, he's showing Xiaoji what his wife was doing, and I kind of feel like he was like not respectful or anything, or probably like he's American. If that's his portraying like a British person, he would probably do it in a more reserved or respectful way, more gentleman way. Oh, your wife is doing something not nice, rather than just showing him directly. Yeah.
I don't think we should read these CIA guy as American. Of course, in the story he is American, but in many of the Han Song stories, there are lots of foreigners got involved, and but I believe that these foreigners are not only foreigners; they represent the sense of the outcomer. So this outcomer is they are not necessarily coming from the other nations, other countries, but they can also coming from other times and other spaces as well. Because I just wrote an article for Science Fiction Studies and talking about the Mars over America. The Mars of America. It's one of the untranslated stories as well, but it talks about a Chinese protagonist, is a Go player, traveling to the United States and stuck somewhere in the United States because the collapse of the utopian AI stuff. And in that story, many people read that story as a kind of a counter relation between China and the US. But in my interpretation, it's not with the US actually. It's about the China itself. It's a different historical period of China. So, but for this story, we have a person coming from outside. It could be from the States. It could be from the UK as well, and it could be from any part of in the world. But the important thing is a newcomer, someone not us, not from the inside, and they get involved in the environment, and they trigger something, and also their presence in that environment is not favored by the authority, especially his conversation with people and his underground activities. They are not welcomed by the state, and people and the state also was trying to eliminate these dissenting elements as well. So we have a difference. We have something. We have some element different from others. So I think it could represent the kind of also a doubleness in the Chinese history, and also the different perspective how we encounter China from a particular historical period. And during that historical period, we also have the influences in the past that's still functioning in the society. So that is why people feel confusing about everything, because they are not from the same part of history. They are from the different part of history, and they are sort of compressed in a very short time, and they have to interact with other historical elements. So that is why we always have this kind of a troubling person and troubling character trying to make fuss of people's mind, right? To tell something different from your original understanding. And back then, so that is when the process of so-called enlightenment starts, right? So you start to realize something is not that quite same with what you are told by the state or by what you can see from the society. So there are other layer of reality going on behind the scene. So for myself, I would read this American guy from that perspective. Not only American, he's also from outside the system. Yeah.
You reminded me a little bit there of the story I did on episode 1 of this podcast, Madman's Diary. Huangren Erji, if I remember the Chinese right.
Yeah.
So yeah, like there's the, I guess in the frame of this story, there's the daytime world where everyone is tired and they go to work. Then there's the hidden reality that you need to be woken up to, that you're being exploited in your sleep. In that one, I guess that's the most striking demonstration of that hidden world is the words written between the lines of the Confucian texts: eat people, eat people, eat people. So also, I guess, about exploiting people.
Sorry, I was off the net.
Oh, it's okay. Welcome back.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say something about the Americans. Is it
Good.
too late?
No, it's not too late. No.
The American will show up as a whistleblower, and I have noticed him. And he is show up at the chapter 3 at the first time, and at the beginning he is not American, he's just a foreigner. I think the foreigner is really interesting thing. Who is the foreigner? In this novel, it refers to an American. I think it's actually quite interesting thing. That leads to the question about the other. On this basis, that self-reflection and understanding are introduced. And in this novel, American may think like a person who know the fact, know the truth, and he wanted to awake the people in China, and who was betrayed bad by the government. I think this structure is interesting and could start it deeper if someone want to start it.
Yeah, Guanzhao was just sort of mentioning that. Guanzhao, do you have any other like classic examples of these sorts of characters?
Did you? I believe you have read the With Tide by TrChFic, right? And there are also one of the characters coming back from the States, right? So Chen, I forgot his name, but one of his the protagonist or narrator of the story, and coming back from the state and to get involved all this kind of clan conspiracies. And also we have the American companies, right? We have the American companies and trying to get some money from the waste recycling industry in that story. So I think because people coming back and people coming from the outside is one of the very important themes, not only in science fiction, but also in a larger part of the Chinese literature. Unfortunately, I myself is not that familiar with that part of the mainstream Chinese literature, so shame on me. But so I believe the other panelists, Scarlett and Jing, could have more examples in that way, because I learned very much from Mia Ma, my friend that saw us, and she knows a lot of things about this, but I haven't learned enough from her, I'm afraid, but I think Jing and Scarlett would have more examples to share.
Okay, that's fair enough. Is he, before he's determined to be an American, do you guys remember if he's referred to as 外国人 or 老外?
He said 外国人.
外国人, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, a thing that struck me being a 外国人 in China was that word was usually taken to mean a Westerner, which made me wonder if I was from like Africa or the Middle East or South America, would I be as still considered the same kind of 外国人? But usually, like if a Chinese friend asked me like for my opinion about the Western world, they'd say, what do 外国人 think? And I'd be like, well, I'm only from one country, so I can tell you what Scottish people or UK people think, but I can't speak for Americans, and I can't speak for all of the outside world. But yeah, maybe in this story, that's the point. It doesn't matter where he's from. It's just that he's from somewhere else. Yeah.
My tutor is just starting the 外国人 discuss in the paper and in the literature walks.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about that?
In 1880s, maybe many the foreigners, the 外国人 is referred to the person who came from American or Europe. We don't use this word to describe, just like Japanese or Thailand people. It's just a unique. It's just kind of a unique word referred to the European or to the Americans.
Yeah, which is, I think that can confuse English speakers, because when we learn the word, we're told it means foreigner, but of course foreigner does not refer to any specific parts of the world. It just means you're from some other country. So yeah, I guess if anyone's listening and learning Chinese, that's a useful thing to know.
Yeah, that's interesting because when I was little, when I was in the primary school, when we were talking about 外国人, foreigners, so the first impression I got would be people like Angus, that you are definitely one of the 外国人. And
you mean a white person?
Yeah, white person, Anglo-American, but it's not Anglo-American, but it's French people, like people from the Europe.
Western
so we can
Europeans,
distinguish.
Yeah.
From distinguish, yeah, he's from somewhere in the Europe or in the North America, and I think part of the reason is we can't really, at least for myself, I can't really distinguish the Korean people and Japanese people from ourselves, which got more population in China than Westerners, the so-called Westerners in China, and. But I don't know why, but when I was little, when I was very young, and when we were talking about the things, and my first impression going to be that. I think also part of it's a very, very personal story, so I can't speak for others as well. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of Shanghai when I lived there was the Koreatown, because that was not just a Koreatown, actually. That was a part of Shanghai that had a lot of, well, technically, Waiguoren, lots of non-Chinese people, but not Western Europeans, not really even Eastern Europeans, not North Americans. It was expats from neighboring countries, basically. So Koreans, but also Japanese. I think maybe also Hong Kong people as well. So a lot of people. If I'm walking on the street, if I'm just looking, I wouldn't really know who's from elsewhere, who's not. I would have to use my ears to listen to what language they're speaking. And it was just interesting in that it felt kind of similar to some of the Westerner heavy parts of Shanghai, some of the dynamics you would see, but on the other hand, just totally different. And I could go on and on and on and on and on about that, but that's nothing to do with this story. So I'll stop there. We've been talking for a while now, so I think we can go on to the miscellaneous section, the sort of lighter section. So my first miscellaneous question would be, if you could think of a Chinese word of the day to like attach to this story, what one would it be? I'm gonna go for assuming I can remember this one correctly, Tangping, lying down. It's Tangping, right?
Tangping, lying down. Yeah.
Tangping, yeah, because that's what everyone wants to do. Everyone really needs to sleep, but they can't. So that's my word of the day. Anyone else got one?
My word of the day would be 吊儿郎当. So it's a word from the story. So it means careless and Carol undisciplined. So the other way around of people from the story.
Oh, right. So was that 吊儿?
Yeah, 吊儿郎当.
Okay, got it. Guanzhao, would you add any other words?
Well, is it boring to say sleepwalking from the story, 梦游?
No.
Right, because I think 梦游, sleepwalking, really speak to the theme of the story, right?
Yeah, I think it does. So meng yo, that's yo like lu yo, is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I remembered. I didn't forget all my Chinese.
Yeah, dream and travel and make sleepwalking.
Dream travel. Nice. Thank you. And Jin, do you have any a fourth word of the day that you would want to add?
I think it's maybe 闭眼. It means close your eyes and then you can sleep.
Perfect. Or close your eyes and you can forget about the horrible truths about your society.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, next miscellaneous question. If you could pair a piece of music with My Country Does Not Dream, what would you go for? So this one's kind of hard, but if no one's got one, I've got one I can think of.
I have one. I don't really think, isn't it a feat, but if I have to match one, the first song came into my head is Blue Earth, this song is the opening song of the Animal World program on CCTV channel. I used to watch it every day. I kind of grew up with this song. It's really interesting.
Why did you pair that with My Country Does Not Dream?
I don't know. It just occurred in my brain. I don't have the idea of why I will think it will fit it.
Scarlett and Guangzhou, do you have any music you'd pair with this one?
I got one, and I think it's quite great for the story. It's called 我们走在大路上. We walk on the great road. This song was my class sung for the choir competition in junior school, and we won the first out of the 18 classes. And I immediately thought of this song saying this question because it's a patriotic song, and you can find, I'll send you a link later. You can find there are 3 different versions: the original version, the one for Cultural Revolution, and the contemporary one.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Shall I play the music, or
I'll
want to check it later?
I'll edit it into the episode, but if you want to let us hear it, you can like play it into, well, you can play it into your microphone, or you can give us the link, whatever you like, and then we'll know, if you want, we'll know what you're talking about.
Okay, I'll leave it to you then.
Okay.
So I'm sure when you play this music and you can find the vibe from the music, I chose the Cultural Revolution version because it just pushes you to go ahead. In the lyric, it says 向前进, 向前进all the time in every paragraph. So in that story, those people wearing red armbands, they are saying the songs of the 1960s and 1970s, and this could even be one of them, I think. And also, as I mentioned before, in the song, there's a line saying the American imperialism and Soviet revisionism are going to perish, which is which fits the story too. Like, and as that spy guy is American, yeah.
The kind of picture of work that you sort of described there about it being a collective thing where we got to like strive hard and work. Where I got my first sort of, I think the first contact I had with that idea wasn't, or that sort of mindset rather, wasn't really from China. It was from pictures you'd see of Japanese workers doing like their sort of work exercise routines all together. And I don't know, it doesn't seem strange to me now. I've seen Chinese like workers from like fast food places and hairdressers doing the same thing together. But as I think as a Westerner from what is in many ways more individualistic society, it's not just a cliche. This idea seems like kind of, I don't want to say ridiculous, that seems mean, but it seems really quite foreign, because it's not like we don't have patriotism here in the UK or in any Western countries, but I think it takes very different forms. The idea of someone expressing their patriotism in the UK by working very hard at work, it's unimaginable. People come up with selfish reasons to work hard at work, or to make themselves rich, or maybe pathetic reasons like to impress their boss or to help their company. But the idea of working hard to forward the nation is something I don't think you'd encounter it here in the UK. But the fact that we can get that from a Cultural Revolution song or from a story about a much more capitalist era is, I don't know, it does seem like kind of a, if not a Chinese characteristic, then at least a foreign characteristic to me as a Westerner. So yeah, that was a bit of a long response to a simple thing, but I felt I wanted to say it. Does anyone want to respond to that, or shall I share my song that I would pair with it? All right, I'll just go ahead. So I've got something totally different. I've got a remix of an old, I actually don't really even know the genre. I guess drum and bass, a remix of a drum and bass track from the 90s. That was this genre of dance music that probably was blowing up in the UK when I was a small child, like learning to walk sort of age. And the remix, the song's called Terminator. I'm not sure why, but there's a remix of it that like speeds it up and brings in clips from the movie Terminator. And I discovered this track listening to a mix of music put together by Mark Fisher, who I've mentioned before on the show. And one of the things Mark Fisher was interested in was the sort of political theory of accelerationism. He was a left-wing thinker, so he was sort of keen on left-wing accelerationism, but it takes many forms across the political spectrum. And the idea of accelerationism, I mean, the clue is in the name, is to make things go fast, that speeding up politics and the economy and society is a desirable thing to do, either in and of itself or to reach a particular goal. And a thing I've noticed in my new job, which is an industry magazine for the pharmaceutical industry, is that people running businesses love to talk about accelerate this, speed up that. There is not much talk about how to make the world a nicer place outside of the context of making the business more slick, because the logic goes, if you can speed things up, if you can make them more efficient, if you can upscale them, increase the scale, then you can lower prices, lower barriers, make things smoother and easier. So for example, talking about replacing humans with machines in the factory, that is, to them, it's a morally good thing because it can make your business more efficient, it can make your product cheaper, and never mind the people that got laid off. So the reason I bring up Terminator is the story of the Terminator films is about something from the future coming back in time to prevent that future from being stopped. But a sort of a fantastical idea in this pro-capitalist version of accelerationism is that capitalism is basically going to build itself, that if you leave it alone, it will put itself together. And the desirable thing sort of in a way is to speed it up artificially. And it doesn't matter if it distorts humans, destroys humans, warps, creates strange things in society. It's going to become the thing that rules us, and there's not much we can do about it. And in this song, you totally feel that vibe. It starts off a bit eerie, and then it becomes very inhuman and bizarre in a way that I think only electronic music could. So that's what I would go for. Sorry I talked about that for so long.
Is out there. You're talking about things that I haven't done yet. It's right in the
It's maybe a bizarre music choice because it doesn't necessarily channel the vibe of the story, because it's not actually, the story does get violent at a point, doesn't it? When he's getting chased, it gets quite intense. So I would probably set that remix over the bit where he's running away from the men in black and getting shot at, because it's intense. So yeah, that would be my song. The next bit I've got is a bonus question. So I would put this one up on the Patreon feed for the show for people who want to support the show. And it's actually linked to the song I chose. It's about supercharging the economy. So in this story, the Chinese government pulls a bit of a trick, basically, to make their economy more powerful. They eat up people's sleep to use it for economic production and consumption. But if you guys could use some kind of crazy science fiction technique or magical technique to boost the economy or supercharge the country, like what would you do? What would your crazy scheme be? Do you have any ideas? Because I actually didn't think about this. I would need to think about that. Guanzhao, do you have a crazy plan to make the economy go twice as fast?
No, it's very tricky.
That's the end of the bonus section, I guess. So coming back down to sane, normal discussion, I wonder if we want to point the readers to any other stuff like this story, if they enjoyed it. Or Jin, since you didn't enjoy this story, maybe you could suggest some alternative reading for listeners. Does anyone have any recommendations right off the bat?
I can recommend some of my favorite novels like Holographic Rose Fragments and Burning Crumbs, Hathaway. I'm always trust William Gibson. And maybe I can use the hottest word in Chinese context to express this. YYDS. It's a pinyin short, but we all see it in the English letter sound, which literary meaning is external God. Often used to describe an awesome subject. And if someone's interesting is on Chinese novel can't be published in China, Liu Cixin's 2195 may your choice. 2185 is Liu's first novel and is also his only cyberpunk work. Even some Chinese researchers like me will forget that Liu is a computer engineering and thought he haven't written novels in cyberpunk style. But I'm not sure whether the novel has the English edition.
What did you say it was called?
2185, 2185.
Oh, interesting. No, I don't think that one's out in English, but they do bring out quite a lot of Liu Cixin in English translation, so maybe it's just a matter of time before someone does that one.
Yeah, and also that one is the start of the Chinese New Wave, is as Dr. Song Mingwei says. So China 2185. So he believes that is the start of the Chinese New Wave.
Interesting. You said YYDS is a pinyin short. So what does that stand for?
永远的神。永远 means forever. 然后神 it means God. That's the literal meaning.
Right. And what does that, is that the name of a novel? What does it mean in this context?
Angus, it's kind of a daily conversation that when you think something's really good, something's like should be recommended, and then you say this kind of stuff is YYDS, is kind of eternal God, and then you should read it or like it.
Oh, right. Okay. I understand now. Interesting. Right. I'll make sure that one's in the show notes. Thanks, Jin, for your recommendations. Scarlett, where would you point our listeners for more reading?
I can't think of too much. I would say maybe Brave New World could be something similar in the feeling of it. Yeah. Is that like too classic?
No, I think a lot of people have heard of that one, but not everyone's necessarily read it. And I think an interesting, or what I think is interesting anyway, parallel between Brave New World and this story, or some of Han Song's comments that he made when he came on to the London Chinese Sci-Fi Book Club to talk about the work, is that there's something sort of desirable about these kind of scary worlds in these stories. So in Brave New World, everyone's happy. It's not like in 1984 by George Orwell where everyone is oppressed. Brave New World would be an okay place to live if you don't know what's wrong with it, because you get happy pills. You don't, as far as I'm aware, you don't have to work too hard. I won't spoil anything too much, but people's sexual desires can be fulfilled in interesting new ways.
Yeah, so it's like the opposite way. And also, by the way, definitely don't recommend the series of it.
Oh, right. Is there a show?
Yeah.
It's not good.
No.
Okay, I'll avoid that. But yeah, so there's something kind of desirable about that world. And in there are, like I said, there's moments in My Country Does Not Dream where Xiaoji says something like, the light is always brightest in the dark. There's something fascinating about the world that's being created. And he does have some mixed feelings. He has some positive feelings that it's a way to boost the power and influence of China. But in when Han Song was talking about the story and he was relating the situation in the story to how he feels about modern China, I think he said something along the lines of that you have to if you can't really change the direction that things are moving in, all you can really do is accept the world, accept that there's a dark bargain going on, that maybe you can improve your life by working for your country, even if it doesn't, even if you're being exploited, and even if you maybe don't agree with everything your government's doing, you just have to live with that bargain. And if you can enjoy some benefits from it, as many people in China have, people's lives have got better. And I could think of a parallel here. Maybe my generation's not getting richer in the UK, but we are getting nicer gadgets, better streaming services. You get something out of the dark bargain. So yeah, that's why I think Brave New World and not 1984 would be the right of the right of those two classics to pair with this one. So I think that is a good choice. Long story short, Guanzhao, where would you point readers?
I can't really imagine anyone like reading Han Song's story for fun. But if there are some people like them, they should be looking forward to the the new translation for the Hospital trilogy, and that is the latest novels written by Han Song, published in 16, 17, and 18 in a row. So it's a trilogy. It's called Hospital Trilogy, and it is even more confusing, more ambiguous than the story we're reading today. So they can have a try for them. And also there is also a British writer I find we can read together with Han Song is John Harrison, and his it's not recent, but one of his latest stories, novels, the Kawaguchi trilogy, Kefauchi Kawaguchi trilogy, is there are 3 installments, right? So the Light and Nova's Wind. Light was published in 2002 and Nova's Wind in 2006, and also the last one, I forgot the title, but it was published in 2012. So that trilogy is, so you can also get a sense of these ambiguities in those novels as well.
Okay, and I'll recommend an author I may have name dropped on the show before, because he's got a very ambiguous story called The Hospice. So maybe it's more connected with Han Song's Hospital trilogy than this story, but it's a similar thing. It's incredibly ambiguous, and the writing style is often rather elegant. I suppose it's not that hard to read, but sometimes you got to sort of blink and read the sentence again. So the author is Robert Aikman, and the story is called The Hospice. And in the story, a guy, it's going to sound so mundane, a guy is driving along a road. He's looking for somewhere to stay, and he ends up at somewhere that seems to be a hotel, but then seems to also possibly be like either an old person's home, like a home for old people, a care home, but then also seems to seem a little bit like a prison or an underworld as well. And the story gives you no answers. And I won't spoil as to whether the main character gets away or not. But if our descriptions of like a strange, ambiguous, and difficult story sounds exciting to any of our readers, I'd recommend that one. And to be honest, a lot of Robert Aikman's stories, because they're definitely in the horror and weird, probably more so in the weird and strange zone. So that's my recommendation. Last question, sort of along similar lines. What are all of you guys reading just now?
These days, I've been reading a collection of robots by Asimov, which consists of 31 short stories. And I also read some researchers related to narratology. As for personal read, occasionally I study zhuangzi, which is a charming sort of the warring state period in China, and it's my boyfriend's research, so I read it a lot and occasionally.
So another, well, I don't know if all of Zhuangzi's writings are kind of beguiling. I only know the one about the butterfly, but yeah, interesting that we're on that theme. Scarlett, what about you? What are you reading just now?
I just finished a short one called 悲观主义的花朵 by Liao Yimei. It's called Pessimist's Bouquet, but unfortunately it's not translated into English yet. And so the writer, he's always a playwright. She wrote, my God, how to say this? Rhinoceros in Love. The play was translated by BBC a few years ago, I think.
Interesting.
So she's from Beijing, and her writing style is I feel like it's kind of like the female version of Wang Shuo, and there are like too many highlight sentences from that book. I even wrote down in my notebook. So yeah, it's a short one you can finish in 1 or 2 days. So if you want to have a relax, I would recommend that.
Cool. And Guanzhao, what are you reading these days?
I am reading China Mieville's The Iron Council, so the last installment of the Fossil trilogy. Yeah, I found it very exciting as well. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I recorded episode 71's interview yesterday, so the book I'm reading since then has not changed. It's Yan Yanko's Lenin's Kisses. But I did actually finish a book that I went away on a holiday and left the end unfinished, then just finished it, I think yesterday, day before yesterday. It was another book by that Robert Aikman fellow, and it was his first of his 2 autobiographies, The Attempted Rescue, which was about sort of his childhood and life as a young man up to the start of World War II. So it's not really, doesn't really have much bearing on anything we've talked about, but I thought I'd name drop it. So yeah, that's us at the end, really. We've had a very good chat, I think. Is there anything we've not discussed that you guys would like to get out there so that listeners can be, I don't know, properly informed? Is there anything we've not said that you want to say?
I might have like one I wanted to add to one of your questions about like Chinese people's opinion on 外国人. It's kind of funny. It's like they have those posters in the notice board telling like Chinese young girls not to date foreign guys, but it's like a comic strip or something telling you like they might using you to steal information from you.
Oh, I've seen that one. Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, that one made me wonder how many working young women in China have state secrets. Surely it can't be that many, but
yeah,
like I suppose corporate secrets are a thing too. So I guess thank you all for coming on board. Thanks for keeping your state secret secret, everybody. It's good that you didn't spill the beans. Likewise, I did not spill any top secret Scottish secrets to you, except the plan to, of course, seize the nuclear weapons. So yeah, on that note, just thank you all for coming along. It was a fun conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Angus, for inviting all of us. Yeah, really happy to be back.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you back, Guanzhao. And it was actually very fun re-listening to the Folding Beijing episode. I think that was a good one. And hopefully we've topped it by bringing in more Kehuan enthusiasts.
Yeah, that was the episode taking me involving in your show.
Oh, that's what made you a fan?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Well, I suppose that would be the one Guanzhao shared with you guys, presumably in the WeChat group.
Yeah, I did. I did share the information, share the words.
The power of WeChat. And we've reached the end. So thank you again, Scarlett, Jin, and of course Guanzhao. Amazing to have you on. Amazing to talk about Han Song. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you, London Chinese Science Fiction Book Club. Now remember, listeners, if you want to join their events, then go to their Twitter or go to their WeChat group. If you're having trouble finding anything, then hit me up. I will make sure that you get onto their mailing list, and if you've got WeChat, I'll get you into their WeChat group. That's a promise. It is a promise from the bottom of my heart. Now, also from the bottom of my heart, more plugs, I'm afraid. First one.